Chapter 47 Tantalus Drive 1. November 1:40 a.m. When Eric Jansen swung into the parking lot area by the Diamond Head Lighthouse, the place had been deserted. There was no sign of Vendrick's car. He had arrived too late, or maybe too early. Maybe Drake hadn't shown up yet. He had parked in the corner of the area and debated what to do next. Wait for Drake? But Drake might have already been here. Should he go to the police? But that might cost the survivors their lives, because Drake knew where they were, and he might be heading for Tantalus to kill them. Eric knew he had to go to Tantalus, and so he drove up the Tantalus Drive, the truck roaring and misfiring, past expensive homes on hairpin turns. The road came to a gate with a rutted dirt track beyond it. The gate wasn't locked. He started driving up the track, around up the steep mountainside through grava forests, and came out at the lip of the crater, and it followed the lip down through dips and gullies, washout in several places. This was a four-wheel drive track only, and Eric was glad he had a fat tire truck. Eventually, he reached a turnaround. Still no sign of Drake's truck. The place was deserted. He did not have a flashlight. That was a problem. But he got out of the truck, leaving the headlights shining towards the great boulder, and stood there, listening. There was a reddish glow through the trees, and he began crashing through the undergrowth toward it. When he reached the great boulder, he saw what had happened. Embers were dying down. The soil smoking, and the ground reeked of gasoline. Drake had done the deed. He had killed everybody. Regretting that he hadn't brought a flashlight, Eric got down on his knees and found the entrance to the rat warren. Rourke's hideout. Anybody there? He called. It was useless. He waited for a while, though, poking his finger into the soil, wondering if there were survivors. It was too dark to see much, and they would be very small. He worried he might crush somebody by accident. But there weren't any survivors. Anybody could see that. He stumbled through the woods, back to the truck. Rick and Karen, parked on the branch, saw the headlights of another vehicle bumping slowly around the rim of the crater. It was a truck. Rick watched for a while, then said to Karen, "I'm going to investigate." "Don't." He ignored her. He untied his plane and started it, and taxied off. She heard it whining upward, toward the crater rim, toward the great boulder. "Damn you, Rick," Karen yelled. She wasn't going to be left alone. So she started her plane and followed him. Rick saw a man get out of the truck. He circled through the branches, listening for bats, but he didn't hear any sonar, and he flew closer to the man. The man walked to the great boulder and got down on his knees in the darkness. His face wasn't visible. The man stood up from the boulder and walked away, crashing through the underbrush, a black silhouette. Rick followed him, dodging among branches and trunks. The man arrived at the parked vehicle. It was a strange-looking truck with fat tires and a weird paint job. The man got in, and the dome light came on, revealing his face. Rick had seen the man before. Where? He circled past the window as the truck started with a roar. "Karen," he called on the radio. "Who is this guy?" She swooped past Rick and made a steep turn by the truck. She was getting the hang of flying. It was pretty easy. "It's Peter's brother." "I thought he was supposed to be dead." "Is he in with Drake?" "How would I know?" Karen answered testily. The truck started and began rumbling off, moving along the dirt track. Karen ran her engine up to emergency maximum. Running at full power, the airplanes could barely keep up with the truck, even though it bounced slowly along the dirt road. The moment the truck arrived at a paved road, it would speed up and they would never catch it, and it would be gone. They had to get Eric's attention soon. He was driving with the windows rolled up. Karen flew alongside the window, close to the man's face, and waggled her rings. No reaction. Then the truck sped up, leaving them behind in swirling dust. Get in the slipstream," Rick said. There would be a zone of dead air behind the truck's cab, he thought. So he dove for it. Watching the back of the man's head in the glass, his plane flipped over and tumbled. The air behind the cab had gone turbulent and chaotic, and he nearly crashed on the truck's bed. The truck came to a bad spot in the road, where rain had washed a gully. The man slowed and rolled down his window, and leaned out to get a better look. Karen flew through the window into the cab. She circled once, and the man drew his head back in. She made a slow pass in front of his eyes, and rolled the plane, its lights winking. He saw that. He jammed on the brakes. "Hey!" His eyes followed her as she banked and turned and flew low over the dashboard. He held out his hand, palm upward, and she landed on his hand. She climbed out and stood on his hand. While he looked at her, Rick flew in and landed on the dashboard. "Which ones are you?" he said, his voice rumbling. He held Karen delicately, and he tried not to breathe too much as he spoke. He didn't want to blow her off his hand. Karen held up her radio headset and pointed to it. She remembered that Jalakinsky had said the radios could be used to communicate with full-size people. Maybe it would be easier to talk by radio. "You bet." He put it down on the dashboard with a plane and opened the glove box and took out a headset and plugged it into a mess of electronic equipment sitting on the seat. "Go to 71.25 gigahertz, he said. Rick and Karen put on their headsets and tuned their aircraft radios. The man opened his mouth and spoke words that rolled out. "Can you understand me now?" An instant later, the same words sounded on their headsets in Eric's normal speaking voice. Can you understand me now? This is a squirt radio. It collects my voice and speeds it up, and squirts it at you. It also slows down your voices so I can understand you. They explained to Eric what had happened. We need to get into the generator as soon as possible, Karen said. First about my brother. They told him. As Karen describes Peter's death, Eric's palms hit the steering wheel, throwing the microhumans and the planes into the air. They came down amid choking dust particles and waited. They gave him time. When he opened his eyes, his face had become set and calm. I'm taking you into Nanogen. Then I'm going to find Vincent Drake. Chapter 48. Chinatown, Honolulu. 1 November, 2:30 a.m. Dan Watanabe woke to the buzzing of his cell phone. He reached for it in the dark and knocked it off the bedside table, and heard it hitting the floor. He groped for the light. Fearing bad family news. His 7-year-old daughter, living with his ex-wife, his mother. But the caller was the security chief of Nanogen. Got a minute, Lieutenant? Watanabe ran his tongue over his sticky mouth. Yeah. There was a fire on Tantalus tonight. Watanabe grunted. What? It was small. Probably didn't get reported. Some people died in it. I'm not following you. Those students. They were murdered. He sat up fast, instantly full awake. Take the man into custody. Get a statement. Where are you? I'll have a car. No, I just want to talk with you. You know the deluxe plate? It was open all night. He was nursing a cup of coffee at a back booth, the only customer in the place, when Don Michele walked in. The man seemed resigned. Michele eased himself into the booth. Watanabe didn't waste time with chit-chat. Let's hear about the students. They're dead. Vin Drake has killed at least 8 people. They were small people. How small? Michele put his thumb and forefinger half an inch apart. Really small. Tell you what, Watanabe said. Let's pretend I believe you. Nanogen has a machine that'll shrink anything, even people. A waitress came over and asked if Michele wanted breakfast. He shook his head, and waited in silence while the waitress walked away. Will this machine shrink another machine? Watanabe asked. Well, sure, Michele answered. Will it shrink a pair of scissors? Michele squinted. What are you talking about? Willie Fong, Marcos Rodriguez. Michele didn't answer. Dan Watanabe went on. I understand you want to tell me what happened to the missing students, but I also want to hear about the microbots that cut Fong's and Rodriguez's throats from ear to ear. How do you know about the bots? Michele said. Did you think the Honolulu Police Department doesn't have microscopes? Michele sucked on his lips. The bots weren't supposed to kill anybody. So what went wrong? The bots were reprogrammed to kill. By who? I think by Drake. Watanabe took that in. So what happened to the students? Michele explained about the supply stations in Manoa Valley, and about Tantalus Base The kids must have found out something bad about Drake, because he's been pushing me to get rid of them. Kill them? Yes. They ended up in Manoa Valley. Drake wanted to make sure they didn't get out of the valley alive. They tried to escape. A few of them made it to Tantalus. He explained to Watanabe about Ben Walk. Drake torched the place. Also, I'm pretty sure he murdered our chief financial officer and a vice president. Watanabe's head was swimming. Vin Drake seemed to have killed 13 people. If this was true, Drake was extremely dangerous. Tell me why I shouldn't decide you're a nutcase, he said to the security man. Michele hunched over. You decide what you want. I have to tell you the truth. Are you involved in these deaths for $7 million? In his years as a detective, Dan Watanabe had witnessed many confessions. Even so, a confession never failed to give Watanabe a sense of surprise. Why did people decide to tell the truth? It was never in their best interest. The truth doesn't set you free. It sends you to prison. Last time we talked, Lieutenant, Don Michele went on, you said something about Molokai. Watanabe frowned. He didn't remember. Oh yes, Michele used the traditional Hawaiian pronunciation. You said Molokai is the best of the islands, the security chief went on. I think you meant the people of Molokai, not the island. I don't know what I meant, Watanabe answered, and sipped his coffee, and sat back, keeping his gaze fixed on Michele. I was born in Puku'u, Michele went on. That's a little spot on East Molokai. Just a few houses, and the sea. My grandma raised me. She taught me to speak Hawaiian. Well, she tried to. She also taught me about doing the right thing. I joined the Marines, served my country, but then, I don't know what happened to me. I started doing things for money. Those students didn't deserve what we did to them. We left them to die. When they didn't die, Drake sent people to take them out. I will do a lot of things for $7 million. But there's some things I won't do. I won't take orders from Vin Drake anymore. I'm like Paul Hanna. Work is done. Where is Mr. Drake right now? Watanabe asked. The man was beyond dangerous. Netigen, I think. Watanabe flipped up his phone. We'll get him. Not a good idea to just walk in there, Lieutenant. Oh, Watanabe said coldly, holding his phone away from his ear. You could hear his phone ringing. Tactical deployments are pretty damn effective, I've noticed. Not with microbots. They can smell you. And they can fly. It's a hornet's nest in there. Alright, tell me how to get in. There's no way in unless Vin Drake permits it. He controls the bots. Hand controller, like a TV remote. Watanabe got an answer to his phone call. Marty, he said, putting the phone back to his ear. We've got a problem at Netigen. Eric Jansen swung the fat tire truck into the entrance of the Kalikimaki Industrial Park. A cruise past the Nanogen building. Apart from a sodium light splashing the entrance door, the place seemed lightless and dead. In the early hours of a Sunday morning, Karen King and Rick Hutter stood on the dashboard of the truck next to their aircraft. Near them, a plastic hula girl bobbled, stuck to the dashboard and swinging in a glass skirt. The hula girl loomed over Karen's and Rick. Eric drove the truck inside an unfinished building. Just the frame of a warehouse and some concrete block walls, which sat next to Nanogen. He parked behind a wall, out of sight. He shut off the engine and got out, and listened for a few moments, and looked around. Time to move on, Nanogen. He put on the Squirt radio headset and spoke into the voice pickup. Launch your planes and follow me. Karen and Rick climbed into their planes and took off. Eric could hear the props whining near his ears as he crossed the lot, heading for Nanogen. He realized they were flying directly behind his head to keep out of the wind. You okay? He said on the radio. Fine, Karen answered. She didn't feel fine. She felt terrible, like a bad case of flu coming on. Every joint in her body ached. Rick probably felt worse, she thought, since he'd had loads of toxins in his bloodstream. That would accelerate the bends in him, probably. The front door was locked. Eric opened it with a key. He held it open for a moment to let Karen and Rick fly through. Then he closed the door behind him. He moved along the main corridor at a slow walk, hearing the mosquito-like buzzing behind his head. He glanced back and saw the two microplanes, their propellers roaring, floating along under the ceiling's tiles, bobbing in air currents generated by the building's air handling system. His head created turbulence, and they bounced around in his rake as he walked. Don't get sucked into a vent, he warned them. Can't we land on your shoulder? You could carry us, Kevin said to Eric. You're better off in the air. You might need to get away fast if I run into trouble. Eric glanced back at the planes to make sure they were still behind him, and stopped at a corner and peered around it. He was looking down a long corridor past windows covered with black shades. There was nobody in sight. He crossed this corridor and continued down a side hallway to a door, and opened it, and went in, the planes following him. My office, he said on the squirt. Eric's office had been ransacked. Papers were strewn about, and his computer was gone. Eric pulled open a drawer in his desk, rummaged through it, and said, Whew, it's still here. He took out a device that resembled a game controller. It's my bot controller. It should disarm the bots, he explained to Rick and Karen. Then he led them back to the main corridor, and they flew along behind him past the darkened windows. Eric stopped before the door marked Tensor Core. He pushed the door. It wouldn't open. There was no security pad, just a plain lock. He explained. Shit, he said. This door has been locked from the inside. That means... Somebody's in there, Rick asked. Could be. But there's another way into the generator room. We can get in there through the Omicron zone. The boss in the Omicron zone might be programmed to kill an intruder. There was no way to know without entering the zone and seeing what the bots did. Eric just hoped his bot controller would work. He led the flies around a corner, turned right, and stopped by a nondescript door. The door had on it only a small, unfamiliar symbol with a single word, microhazard. Rick flew past the symbol, a few inches from it, and said on the squish radio, "What does this mean?" "It means there are bots on the other side of the door that are capable of causing death or serious injury. If they're programmed that way, it could be nasty in there." Eric held up the controller, where the flyers could see it clearly. Let's hope this controls them. Then Eric tried the doorknob. It wasn't locked, but he didn't open it. Instead, he punched in a series of digits on the controller's keypad. "You see, Drake thinks I'm dead," he said on the squish radio to the flies. "I'm assuming Drake didn't bother to delete my PIN number from my bot controller, since he figured I'd never be using it again." He shrugged. "We'll see." He paused for a moment, pondering the danger on the other side of the door, and then thrust open the door and walked in. He stopped, holding the door open so that the microplanes could follow him through. They had entered the main lab room of the Omicron project. The lights in the room were turned low, and the room was mostly dark. It was not a large space. It could have been a normal engineering lab. It contained some desks, some workstations, some lab benches with magnifying lenses mounted on them. Steel shelves held a myriad of small parts. A window made of thick glass looked into the tensor core. A door stood next to the window, an entry door that led straight from Project Omicron into the core. Eric stood in the middle of the Omicron lab, holding the bot controller in his hand, looking around, listening. So far so good. He couldn't see the bots, but he knew they were there, clinging to the ceiling. He listened for a faint hum. He might just hear their turbines if they sensed him and started dropping off the ceiling, coming for him. If the bots hadn't been disarmed, he'd only know when he started to bleed. But he heard nothing, saw nothing, and felt nothing. His controller still worked. He had disarmed the bots. He gave a sigh of relief. "We're good," he said. There were objects sitting on the lab benches, covered with black cloth. It was hard to see just what they were in the dim light. "I'm going to show you," Eric said on the squish radio to Rick and Karen, "why Vin Drake wanted to kill me. And why he killed your friends." Eric stopped in the middle of the room and held out his arm, sideways, bent at the elbow. "Land on my arm," he said. "You can get a closer look that way." Rick and Karen landed their planes on his forearm, moving carefully and shielding the planes with his hand so they wouldn't be blown off by a stray gust of air. He approached the closest bench. He removed the cloth from one of the objects. It was an aircraft, small, sleek, vicious looking. It did not have a cockpit. "It's a Hellstorm UAV," Eric said. "An unmanned aerial vehicle." "A drone, you mean?" Rick asked. "Exactly, a drone. No pilot." It had a wingspan of 10 inches. Eric brought his arm close to the drone, letting Rick and Karen have a good look. "This is a giant prototype of a Hellstorm," he said. Once it's flight tested, it will be shrunk down to half an inch. Instead of landing gear, the Hellstorm had 4 jointed legs with what looks like sticky pads on the ends, just like the feet on the hexapod trucks. Under its wings, it carried missiles, 2 glass tubes with long steel needles at their noses, fins, and what looked like a rocket motor in the tail. "What does it do?" Rick asked. "Indeed, what does it do?" Eric echoed. "It's a military drone, the size of a moth. It can be used for surveillance. It can also kill people. It can evade any security system in existence. It can fly under a door or through a crack around a window. It can cling to a person's skin or clothing. It can also crawl, using those legs. It can fly along the electrical conduits inside a wall, then pop out and fly around inside a room. It can kill any person, anywhere, anytime. You see those rockets under its rings? Those are toxin micro-missiles. The missiles is armed with supertoxins that Nitrogen has discovered and extracted from life forms in the micro world. Poison from worms, spiders, fungi, and bacteria. The missile has a flight range of 10 meters. This means the drone has standoff attack capability. It can fire toxin missiles from a distance. If one of those supertoxin missiles embeds in your skin, you'll die fast. One micro drone can kill 2 people, since it carries 2 missiles. What are those scopes along the fuselage? Are they jet intakes? Rick asked. No, those are air samplers. They are used for targeting. How's that? Karen asked. The Hellstorm can smell you. Every person gives off a unique fingerprint of scent. Each one of us smells a little different from every other person. Our DNA is unique. So naturally, the combinations of pheromones given off by our body is unique too. A micro-drone can be programmed to seek out the odor of a particular person. Even if you are at a rock concert, the drone can find you in the crowd and kill you. This is a nightmare, Karen King said. The nightmare has no end, Eric Jansen said. Think of a presidential inauguration. Think of 1,000 Hellstorms released into the air, all of them programmed to seek out the President of the United States. If just one micro-drone gets through, the President dies. Micro-drones could take out the government of any nation, Japan, China, Britain, Germany. Any nation could be cut down by a swarm of micro-drones. He turned himself around slowly, while Rick and Karen took in the scene from his arm. This room is Pandora's box. So Nanogen isn't about medicine, said Karen. Nanogen is about medicine. It's just that Nanogen is working both sides of the street. Ways to save lives and ways to end lives. This hellstorm, he touched it lightly. It's a drug delivery system. And you found out about it, so Drake had to kill you. Not quite. I knew about the Omicron program all along. Nanogen has a contract with the Department of Defense to develop microdrones. The research went much better than the DoD people got told. Vin started lying to the government. He started telling them the microdrones were a failure. Why? Rick asked. Because Drake had his own plans for microdrones. We had a problem with our patents on the microdrone system. There's a company in Silicon Valley called Wexattack that actually invented and patented some of this technology. Vin Drake is an investor in Wexattack. He ripped off the patents and used them to build the Hellstorm drone. Then he decided he needed to sell the technology fast, because Wexattack was getting ready to sue Nanogen and get its patents enforced. What got me into trouble with Vin was when I discovered he was trying to sell the microdrones technology to the highest bidder. Not to the US government, Karen said. No. Vin was looking for fast money, and there's more money overseas. Look, there are governments out there with money to burn, and it's dollars. Countries whose economies are growing faster than ours. They will pay anything for the microdrone technology. Anything. I'm not saying that the US government would necessarily do nice things with microdrones. I'm just saying there are governments out there that would commit horrors with them. Some of those governments hate the United States. They have nothing but contempt for Europe. They fear their closest neighbors, and they hate and fear their own people, too. Those governments wouldn't hesitate to use microdrones as a means to their ends. And then there are the international terror groups. They love to have microdrones. I learned that Drake had gone to Dubai, where he was talking with officials of several different governments about selling them the Nanogen Hellstorm technology. I protested to Drake. I said it was a violation of US law. I said it was dangerous for the whole world, but I hesitated. Why? Rick asked. Eric sighed. Drake had given me stock in Nanogens worth millions. If I went to the authorities, I knew Nanogen would crash and burn. My stock would be worth nothing. So I hesitated. Out of greed, I had gone into physics for the pure love of it, and I never thought, you see, that physics would make me a millionaire. Now millions would slip through my fingers if I blew the whistle on Drake, and it was my fatal weakness. Then Drake decided to kill me. I was in my new boat doing sea trials, and I told Alison Bender I'd meet her in Kano for lunch. It's on the windward side of the island. Allison or Drake seeded my boat with Hellstorms, prototypes, but they were loaded to kill me. My engines failed, and that's when I saw one of those damned things fly out of the front cabin. At first, I thought it was just a bug. Then I saw it had propellers and needle missiles, and I knew it was a Hellstorm. Then I spotted another Hellstorm flying out of the cabin, so I texted my brother and dove overboard. The surf protected me. The micro-drones couldn't smell me, couldn't launch missiles at me because I was swimming under the reefs. I made it to Honolulu and went into hiding. If I had surfaced and gone to the police, Drake would have hunted me down with more micro-drones. Vin Drake is drunk on the power of his bots. Eric sighed and paused. And in the silence, another voice spoke. That was an excellent description of me, Eric. I enjoyed it thoroughly. A small bright light went on, and Vincent Drake stood up, behind a rack of computers, the light beam swinging in front of him. Chapter 49. Kalikimaki Industrial Park, 1 November, 3:40 a.m. Drake had been sitting on a chair in a dark space behind the rack of computers. He wore an earbud, and he was holding a gun in his right hand. It was a Belgian FN semi-automatic pistol with a tactical light attached to the trigger guard. The light dodged around. In his left hand, he held a bot controller. He wore a black shirt, black jeans, mud-stained boots. He walked to the center of the room and pointed the gun into Eric's eyes, then towards Eric's forearm, and caught the two aircraft in the light beam. "Peekaboo, I see you," said Drake. The two microhumans heard him perfectly on their headsets. He was using a squirt radio. Rick said to Karen, "Launch." They powered up the aircraft and fell off Eric's arm, diving the props ramping up. Drake didn't seem to care what they did. He aimed the gun and light into Eric's eyes, standing with his body turned sideways and his gun arm held straight out. Drake held up the bot controller in his other hand. Its screen made his hand glow. He touched the button with his thumb and said, "Your bot controller doesn't actually work, Eric. Only mine does." Rick banked his microplane and circled over Eric's head. He couldn't see Karen. He called to her on the radio, "Stay close to me." "Rick, can Drake hear us?" "Of course I can hear you," Drake's voice came on their radios. He swung the gun around suddenly, and the laser beam dodged around their planes, and they saw his vast, leering face. For a moment, Rick thought Drake would fire the gun at them, but then he realized that the bullet probably wouldn't hit their planes. They were too small, dodging around too fast. Drake kept the gun pointed at Eric's head. He held up the bot controller, pressed a button. "There," he said. "What did you do?" Eric said, looking up. Drake looked around and smiled. "I activated the bots." He took a step backward, waiting. "You'll be attacked by them, too," Eric said. "I don't think so." Drake lunged forward and hit Eric in the face with the butt of his gun. Eric groaned and fell to his knees. "What is it about you, Jansen brothers? You seem to require beatings on a regular basis," Drake said. He kicked Eric in the ribs. Eric gasped and went down on all fours and began to crawl. "Where are you going, Eric? Looking for something? Go to hell." Drake kicked him in the side of the head, viciously. Eric slumped down and curled up, and seemed to lose consciousness, while Drake's pistol light danced over him. Eric tried to struggle to his feet, but couldn't. "Well, Eric, there's something you don't realize. The boss ignore my body scent. They'll go after anybody except me," he chuckled. "They respect me." Eric put his hand up to his face, then took it away. His hand was spotted with blood. A small razor cut had opened on his forehead. "Too bad, Eric. Looks like one of them found you." Eric crawled toward Drake, who darted backward and smiled. Eric began swatting at his ears, shaking himself. "Trying to get the bots off, Eric. Can you feel them crawling on your face? In your hair? Soon they'll be in your bloodstream. Don't worry, it doesn't hurt. You just watch yourself bleed." As Drake worked on Eric, Rick flew toward the door to the generator room. That's where he and Karen had to go. He circled in close to the door, and he made a slow pass near it. He saw a small vent at the top of the door. It might be big enough for a microplane to pass through. He couldn't tell. He backed away and flew up close to Karen until their wings nearly touched. He switched off his radio and shouted at her. "He can't hear us when we shout. Fly toward the door to the generator room. Looks like there's a way through." He got some altitude above the vent, in the door, and ran up to full power, and dove at the slot. His rings clipped the slot as he went through, and he ended up inside the generator room, spiraling out of control. Karen followed him a moment later. Rick recovered, got his plane under control. He flew straight toward the center of the generator chamber, the pattern of hexagons below him. He picked out the central hexagon and banked. Looking down, he could see a small white circle in it, far below. It marked the location of the control panel. He could see Karen King flying off his right ring. "I'm going to land by the circle," he shouted to her, hoping his voice carried over the rushing wind as his plane flew. Just then, Drake's voice came on their radio headsets. "I know what you're trying to do," he said. "I saw you fly into the generator room. However, you may wish to know that the bots in there can see you, smell you, too." They saw Drake's face staring in the window. Now his eyes moving, tracking them as they flew. Drake held up the bot controller where they could see it, and he pushed a series of buttons. "I changed the sensitivity. Now they can find you," he said, and looked up at the ceiling of the generator room. Karen followed Drake's gaze. She saw them, glittery specks, scattered across the ceiling. The specks were moving, dropping and falling like tiny raindrops. As they fell, they fanned out, flying under their own power. She saw one of them turn toward Rick, and it began tracking him, flying after him. As Rick went into a dive toward the floor, the bot dove as well. It was powered by a turboprop fan in a housing, and it had a snaky neck, with knives on the end of their neck. As it flashed past her, following Rick, she saw the eyes. The bot had a pair of compound eyes like an insect's, but it was a machine vision system. A pair of eyes meant it had binocular vision, depth perception, she realized. Rick, she shouted, "Behind you." He didn't hear her. He was heading for the floor and the right circle. The bot closed in on him. She had to get that bot off his tail. Not sure what to do, she dove her plane, chasing the bot and Rick. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw more objects flying, and she looked over her shoulder and saw dozens of bots, maybe more, flying behind her. They seemed to be converging on her and Rick. The bots shimmered as they flew, and some of them hovered, darting, seeking. "Rick, behind you," she shouted. He turned his head and saw the bots following him. He immediately pulled up and banked, getting out of the dive, twisting upward, trying to shake the bot off his tail. The bot flew at least as well as Rick did. It was closing in on him. Karen accelerated and dove behind the bot that was chasing Rick. Maybe she could knock it out of the air by hitting it with the nose of her plane. Her propeller was in the tail of her plane, so the plane's nose could be used as a blunt weapon. She aimed for the bot and pushed the throttle forward. Just before the strike, she hunched down in the cockpit and tucked her head, bracing for impact. Her plane slammed into the bot. There was a pinging sound, and her plane ricocheted one way and the bot went the other way, both corkscrewing through the air. The crash didn't hurt the plane or the bot. They merely bounced off each other. The bot whirled around and stopped itself in mid-air and hovered, and oriented itself, and then began to follow her plane. Karen regained control of her plane and peeled away, watching the bot. The bot accelerated toward her, putting on a burst of speed, and then, to Karen's surprise, the bot unfolded two jointed arms. It grabbed hold of the rings of Karen's plane with the sticky pads on the ends of its arms. The bot clung to her plane as she flew. She tried to shake it off, slamming the stick around, banking left and right, but the bot had gotten a firm grip and wouldn't let go. It began cutting into the ring with its blades. It was breaking up her ring. Rick turned back. When he saw the bot attach itself to Karen's plane, Karen was in trouble. He flew toward her, asking himself what he could possibly do to free her plane from the bot's grip. His plane wasn't armed, no guns, no fire control buttons. Nothing. But wait. Rourke had armed the planes with machetes. There was one in here somewhere. He groped around and felt a handle, and swooped toward Karen's plane, holding out the machete like a cavalry rider. "Aye!" he shouted, and hacked through the bot's neck as he passed, severing it. The blades and neck spun off, screaming, and the beheaded bot released Karen's plane and zigzagged away. Seemingly disoriented, Karen regained control of her plane. The bots were hovering, dozens of them. Rick circled through them. A bot darted in and clamped its arms on Rick's plane as he passed, and the bot began jerking his plane around. Then the bot began sniping through the wing with its scissors swords, while Rick struck at it with the machete. But he couldn't reach the bot. Rick's plane went into a spiral. Another bot grabbed his plane and stopped its fall. The bots held Rick's plane in midair, hovering as if they were quarreling over their prize, while they cut it up. Rick bailed out, taking his machete with him. As he fell, he flipped over on his back and saw Karen's plane above him, but clung to it. She was spinning out of control. One bot shredded Karen's propellers, while another tore into the side of the plane. At that instant, Rick landed on the floor on his back, unhurt, still holding his machete. He stood up. The generator room seemed enormous. He had no idea where the microcontrol panel was. He couldn't see the white circle. The plastic floor, glowing with light from below, was strewn with golf ball-sized grains of dirt. Looking up and around, he tried to see where Karen's plane had gone. He couldn't see her. The floor was a mess. He heard a sound like oof. Karen King landed on both feet, like a cat, about 100 yards away. She had bailed out too. She was holding her machete and staring up at the bots. A dozen of them were bobbing high overhead, holding the planes and pieces of the planes and chopping everything up. Debris from the planes rained down. For the moment, the bots seemed distracted by the planes. "It's this way," Kim called, pointing with her machete. Now he could see the white ring. He was surprised by how far away it was. They both started a desperate sprint toward the ring, jumping over debris, running an obstacle course through grit. Rick tripped while leaping over a human hair, and he sprawled. He picked himself up. He had lost sight of Karen. "Karen," he shouted. Overhead, the bots had finished cutting up the planes, and were now flying this way and that, hovering, swooping, fanning throughout the room, as if in seek mode. Rick wondered if the bots would be able to see them as they ran. Dozen more bots dropped from the walls and ceilings, until at least 100 bots were flying back and forth, hunting for the intruders. Were they communicating with one another? It would be only a matter of time before the bots found them. Chapter 50. Tensor Core. 1 November, 5:10 a.m. It's not a bad way to die, Drake was saying. You hardly feel a thing. He looked at the controller. Eric lay propped up with his back against the wall of the Omicron lab, by the door to the generator room, dizzy from the beating Drake had given him. Drake held up the gun at his face, shining the light into his eyes. Eric could feel a butt cutting through his forehead. Blood had begun to drizzle down his face, getting in his eyes. He could see specks hovering in front of his eyes, their props whining like mosquitoes. Apparently, Drake could direct them with a controller, because they all suddenly flew toward his face. He felt them landing on his cheeks, his neck, exploring his eyelids. A bot crawled into his shirt. He could feel it, and heard its engines buzzing. You see how they ignore me, Drake worked the controller. It's because I have the controller, Drake thumbed a joystick, and a bot crawled up Eric's cheek and stopped by the corner of his eye. I can make them crawl into any orifice in your body. Why are you doing this to me? Research, Eric. Eric felt a slight sting near the corner of his eye. The bot had planted its scissors in his skin and was making a hole. It tucked its head into the hole and began wriggling in, snapping through skin cells with the blades. A droplet of blood beaded up on his cheek. The police cars closed off the access road to the industrial park and set up a security perimeter around the Nanjian's building. The vans moved into position, and the hostage rescue squad deployed. The flashes on the police cars played across the metal building. Dan Watanabe waited behind one of the cars, watching the building's door. He had made the handoff to the SWAT unit, so he didn't have operational authority now. But he wanted the op commander, Kevin Hope, to pay attention to him. Where's Dorothy? He said. She's on her way, Hope answered. What about the FD decon unit? In answer to his question, a yellow van came roaring in and ground to a halt. A squad of fire department people deployed from it, pulling on Tyvek protective suits. As soon as they'd put on protective gear, they began setting up a decontamination center with a tent, washing equipment, and a processing line for victims. What's in the building? A virus? Commander Hope said to Watanabe. He had gotten the call to deploy only 20 minutes earlier, and he didn't yet know what the investigations involved. Not a virus. Bots, Watanabe said. Say again? Tiny robots. They bite. Commander Hope gave him a weird look. Don't tell me this is gonna be a shooter with robots, Dan. Not a chance. You can't hit 'em. Any hostages in there? Not that we know. Can't assume anything, Watanabe answered. Somebody handed him a tactical vest, and he put it on. Somebody else brought him a handheld multi-channel communicator. He took the device and keyed it on, and said to Commander Hope, You want me to make the call? Hope gave a wry grin. You talked us into this deployment, Dan. You talk us out of it. Watanabe shrugged and referred to a slip of paper upon which he'd written a phone number. He called it. In the Omicron lab, Eric could feel a half-dozen bots entering his skin, pricking him, as they burrowed while Drake held the gun, and the light pointed into his eyes. Eric debated which way to go, to force Drake to shoot him in the head, or to wait a few minutes for the bots to open his arteries. Just then, a faint buzzing sounded in Drake's jacket. He took out his phone and looked at the call ID. Blocked, it told him. He decided to answer it. He took a deep breath to get his heart rate down. Yes, this isn't Drake. Who's calling? Dan Watanabe, sir. Honolulu Police. Sir, is there anybody in the building with you? Oh my goodness, Dan. I am by myself. Working late. What's this all about? Sir, we have the building surrounded. Would you please walk out slowly with your hands placed on your head? You will be safe, I promise. Good grief, Dan. There's obviously been a mistake. I'll be happy to comply. Just give me a moment. Sir, we need you to come out immediately. Certainly. Absolutely. Drake switched off his phone and advanced toward Eric. His face contorted in fury. You went to the police? Eric shook his head. He was losing a lot of blood. His shirt was darkening in streams. He could feel warmth running down his neck. Drake leaned over Eric and hauled him to his feet. You're just like your fucking brother, sticking your nose into things. They were eye to eye. Oops, Drake said, touching Eric's on the cheek. I think there's one in your eye. Get the controller. Eric had his left hand on the door handle behind him, and he pressed it. The door opened, and Eric fell backwards into the generator room, with Drake landing on top of him. He reached out with his right hand and felt his fingers close over the controller, and he ripped it out of Drake's hand as he fell backward. Drake swore and staggered, sprawling past Eric into the generator room, and he fired the gun. Eric felt the impact in his leg, the bullet passing through his thigh, but oddly, he didn't feel any pain. He was in shock. But he had the controller now, and that was the main thing. He knew what to do with it. He slammed the controller against the floor again and again, smashing it, feeling it break into pieces beneath his hand. Now nobody could control the bots. And then, to his surprise, he saw the gun lying on the floor, right in front of him. While Drake was getting to his feet, Drake had dropped the gun. Drake and Eric lunged for it simultaneously. On the floor, Karen and Rick saw the door open and two gargantuan human figures fell into the room. The gun went off, and the shockwave of the blast rolled over the microhumans. Moments later, the two men fell with a floor-shaking impact, which hurled Rick and Karen into the air. A droplet of blood splashed, exploding into secondary droplets. They picked themselves up and continued to run toward the right circle. One of the men rolled over on his back. He held the bot controller and smashed it repeatedly on the floor. It broke apart, and pieces of electronic boards flew past Karen, knocking her to the ground. She saw the gun skidding across the floor toward her and felt sure it would crush her. She dove away while the two men collided over the gun. A moment later, Eric was holding the gun, pointing it at Drake. He was lying on his back. Eric lay on the floor near Drake. He rolled over and propped himself up, blood running from his leg, and pointed the gun at Drake's face. "You move, I'll shoot you in the head." Drake said, "Wait, Eric. We can get out alive together." "Not going to happen. You killed my kid brother." Eric steadied his finger on the trigger. "But Eric, you're completely wrong. I did everything to save him." "You're insane." Rick and Kevin reached the circle. They could hear a deep thrumming sound, the pulse of robot propellers around them. They had lost track of what the big humans were doing. In the center of the circle, there was a hatch like a manhole cover with a sunken handle. Karen and Rick reached the hatch at the same time. Rick got down on his knees and tugged on the handle. Nothing happened. The hatch seemed to be stuck. By now, several bots had converged on them and were hovering aggressively. A bot flew in and jabbed at Karen with its knives. She swung her blade and with a clang knocked the bot away. It fell back. Karen held up her machete. "Back to back," she shouted. Rick Hunter straightened up and stood with his back to Karen King, his machete drawn. The bots surrounded them and began darting in, flying and hovering, steel blades snicking. Rick slung in a roundhouse blow with his machete and blinded a bot, showing off its compound eyes. The bot hit the ground, its neck writhing, and it took wing, flying off erratically. They continued to hack at the bots, but the bots had no fear, no sense of self-preservation. Rolling a machete, Karen said, "Open it. I'll cover you." Rick bent over and tugged on the hatch again, while Karen straddled him, facing the bots, fending them off, but the hatch wouldn't come up. He began prying at it with the tip of his machete, then tried hacking at it. If he couldn't open it, he could cut through it. But the blade bounced off the plastic. "I can't get it open." "Listen, Rick, ow!" She cried out in pain. A bot had slashed her. She swung her machete over her head. "Try again. Hurry," she yelled. That did it. He threw himself on the door and wrenched it open. Inside was a single red button. He jumped on the button with both feet. The floor shook. The hexagon began to descend into the floor until they were swallowed in a hexagonal chamber. A bot had gotten inside the hexagon with them. It seemed confused. Rick fended it off, banging at it, with the machete as it bounced against the chamber walls. The lights changed color, followed by a humming sound, and then a dreamy feeling came over Rick Hunter, until he felt as if he was floating in space, and dancing with the bot, and dancing with Karen King, the three of them, whirling around and around in a mad waltz. The tensor generator powered up, and the fields crossed and recrossed, and round up in polyodial loops, and the hexagons raised up and met the floor. Rick had a Cannon King and a gigantic enlarged bot were left resting on the floor. The people were full size. The bot had been expanded to the size of a refrigerator. Eric was lying on the floor, bleeding heavily from a wound in his leg, and from several bot cuts. But he was conscious, and he kept the gun trained on Drake, who had started to crawl across the floor toward Rick, an expression of fear looking on his face. "Get Eric," Rick said to Karen. They scooped Eric up by the shoulders and feet and began dragging him out of the chamber. The gun slipped out of Eric's hands and hit the floor. Drake got to his feet and made a mistake. Instead of going for the door, he went for the gun. In that split second, Rick and Karen got Eric Jensen out of the generator room, and they slammed the door shut. Karen saw that it had a simple deadbolt. She threw the bolt. This left Drake locked inside the generator room, in the company of 100 flying microbots and one giant bot. The big bot sat on the floor, its compound eyes turning left and right, its gooseneck raving, its turbofan blades shrieking. But it couldn't lift off. It had become too heavy to fly. Drake glanced at the big bot, then stood up, holding the gun. Rick and Karen watched from behind the bulletproof window as Drake picked up the bot controller. Eric had smashed it thoroughly. He tossed it away. They say they saw Drake's lips moving and heard his voice finally through the glass. "Let me out." Rick shook his head. Drake fired at the window. The bullet starred the glass, but didn't break it. Drake walked up close to the window. "Please help me. I'm very sorry." A bead of blood appeared, hanging at the tip of his nose. He backed up a few steps and looked around wildly, and swatted at a bot circling his head. He cursed and waved his gun around, the light beam crisscrossing the chamber. He caught a bot in the light and fired the gun at the bot. Putting the light around, he fired again, and again, and again. Drake fired at the bots, until the tensor room filled with a haze of cordite smoke. Then he took his cell phone out of his pocket. It was ringing again. "Hello, Lieutenant. Would you please come and get me? I'll tell you everything, of course. I'm in a bit of trouble in the generator room." The generator room, in the center of the building. Bots. "There are no bots in here, Dan. It's perfectly safe." The phone slipped out of his bloody fingers and clattered to the floor. A nosebleed drenched the floor of his shirt and drenched the front of his shirt. Drake coughed, spraying blood. He staggered forward and pressed himself against the window and stared at Rick and Karen. "I will have you killed. I swear it." His eyes went wide, and a bead of blood appeared in the corner of his right eye. A bot emerged through the right of his eyes and began crawling across the surface of Drake's eye, dragging blood along with it as it crawled. Drake seemed to be watching the bot as it crossed his cornea. "Get off me," he whispered, and dug a finger into his eye, and stared at his bloody fingertip, and screamed. Then he turned the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. He had emptied the clip, shooting at the bots. Behind Drake's back, the giant bot had turned its eyes on Drake. It advanced upon him, dragging its arms. Its gooseneck lashed out, and the blades thrust up through Drake's body cavity from below and burst out his chest. The bot raised him up, shook him on its gooseneck, and shrugged, slinging the body across the room. Rick and Kevin had turned their attention to Eric Jansen. Rick tore off his shirt and wrapped it around Eric's leg to make a compress. He took Eric under the shoulders and began half carrying, half dragging him through the Omicron lab. He was barely conscious, having lost a lot of blood. Then they heard the humming sounds of bots. Karen felt a stinging sensation on the back of her neck and slapped at it. Her hand came away bloody. "Room's contaminated. Move it, Rick." Without thinking, she grabbed Eric with one hand and tried to sling him over her shoulder, but she couldn't do it. For a moment, she thought, "What's wrong?" Her superpowers had vanished. They managed to drag Eric into the hallway, and there they were, met with a team of police officers, running guns drawn, wearing body armor. Just behind came a slightly pot-bellied, plainclothes detective. He wore a tactical vest, but clearly wasn't a member of the SWAT team. "Get back," Rick shouted at them. "Bots." "I know," the detective said calmly. He turned to the men. "Get them out, Rick." To Karen and Rick, he said, "Is there anybody else in the building?" "Drake. He's dead." "Everybody out," the detective said. The officers bundled Rick and Karen along, and they scout carried Eric, who had lost consciousness. The last man out of the building was the detective. He came out through the door into the light of dawn, a trail of blood streaming from his forehead. The boss had found Dan Watanabe. "Where's Dorothy?" he called out. Dorothy Gutt had arrived in her Toyota. She came forward. "You brought your magnet?" "Of course." She held up the industrial horseshoe magnet. She had grabbed it out of the forensics lab on the way over. "Everybody into decon." "Hostages and officers," said Watanabe. As he took off his vest, "Dorothy will decontaminate you." An EMT squad brought Eric into the tent first, then loaded him into a med evac helicopter. Last of all, after everybody else had taken their turn, Lieutenant Watanabe walked into the right tent to have Dorothy get the bots out of him. Chapter 51. The Pit. 1 November, 5:55 a.m. In the tensor generator room, the only thing that moved was the gigantic bot. It explored the room, shoving aside Drake's corpse. Looking for a way out, it couldn't find a way out, so its program went into the drilling sequence. It bent its neck to the floor, and using its knives, It cut through the plastic floor. When it had opened a hole, it broke through, crashing down into the pit full of electronic gear. There the bot continued to cut and chop, doing what it knew best. Groaning, rending, crackling sounds came from below the floor of the generator room, the sounds mixing with blue and yellow flashes of electrical sparks. Suddenly, there was a boiling hiss, and a cloud of vapor burst up through the hole in the floor. It was the sound of fury of superconducting magnets failing. The building shook as the magnetic fields in the generator went chaotic and relaxed. As the magnets failed, they heated up suddenly, and the heat boiled the supercooled liquid helium that surrounded the magnets. Helium vapor began pouring out of the pit. Abruptly, the lights in the building went out. Circuit breakers had tripped. Meanwhile, the giant bot still churned through the guts of Drake's machines. There was still somebody alive in the Nanogen building. In the pit, while the big bot hacked at machinery, a slender man watched. He moved slowly, carefully. No jerky movements. Nothing to attract the bot's attention. He removed a hard drive from a rack, pulling the data feed tapes out of their snaps. He slipped the drive into its jacket and left the pit quickly, climbing up a ladder, and from there he entered the fire escape tunnel. Behind him, he heard a thump, then a roar. The bot had started a fire. The escape tunnel, lined with corrugated metal, went horizontally and ended at a ladder. Dr. Edward Cattell, the liaisons man from the Davros Consortium, climbed the ladder. The hard drive in his pocket contained 5 terabytes of data, all of Dr. Benwalk's designs for the tensor generator, along with priceless engineering data from test runs of the generator. When he had put 2 and 2 together and decided that Vin Drake had probably ordered murders of his own employees, he realized that Drake had become unstable and therefore could no longer serve effectively as a chief executive. He had gotten in touch with certain people who for some time had been trying to discover what Nanogen was doing, and had told them that for a certain price he could get them designs of the generator. He had gone into the building that night. He hadn't realized Drake was in there too. Now he stopped at the top of the ladder, below a hatch, and listened. What was going on above? He heard sirens, a helicopter thudding. Maybe he should wait here for a few hours. Give things a chance to settle down. He felt something wet run down his cheek, drip on his collar. He reached up to his face. Yes, a bot had gotten into his cheek. The escape tunnel had become contaminated. He could feel the bot burrowing through the tissues of his cheek. It would not be good if the bot entered a major blood vessel. It could swim to his brain and start cutting there. Give him a hemorrhagic stroke. He would have to exit and take his chances. He pushed open the hatch. It led to the middle of a patch of acacia brush by the parking lot. A fire truck was parked at the corner, but the crew's attention was focused on smoke pouring from the building. He walked quickly into the underbrush, picking at his cheek with his fingertips. Had to get that bot out. He reached into his mouth with 2 fingers, pulled it from the tissues of his cheek, and pinched it between his fingernails, hard, until he felt it crunch. He kept walking. Thorns on the acacias caught at his clothing. He went from one empty lot to the next lot, and crossed behind a warehouse. He emerged from the business park and got on a sidewalk and walked briskly along until he reached a bus stop on the Farrington Highway, and he sat on the bench in the booth. Morning sun kissed the scene with a golden glow. It was a Sunday morning. The bus might not come for hours. He'd just have to wait. It gave him satisfaction and a sense of safety to be wearing a ripped jacket spotted with blood. He smiled. He could have been a homeless person, and very ill. The kind of person nobody wants to look at too closely. And he had the hard drive that contained the only complete set of Ben Work's plans for the tensor generator. The only plans. A dark spot began spreading across the leg of his trousers. It was blood. This worried him. He opened his trousers and felt around on his thigh, and got it. He held up the bot on the end of his fingertip and squinted at it. He could just see the little blaze sparkling in the light. "Whither wander thou?" He murmured to the bot. This was quite good, he thought. He looked like a madman talking to his fingers. He was a free agent, representing only himself at the moment. Cattell crushed the bot between his nails and wiped his bloody hands on his pants. It was like crushing a tick. A fire truck rushed past, sirens screaming. A week later, Lieutenant Dan Watanabe adjusted the angles of a laptop screen that sat on a hospital bed table. In the bed lay Eric Jansen. The screen showed an image of a bot cut neatly in half, with its insides laid open. "We got an ID on the Asian's John Doe I told you about. His name was Jason Chu." Eric nodded slowly. His leg was wrapped in bandages, and his face was pale and wan. Anemia from loss of blood. "Jason Chu," Eric said, "worked for Wixattack, the company that owned the patents on the Hellstorm's drone technology. So, Mr. Chu organized the burglary of Nanogen to try to get information on what Nanogen was doing with his company's patents." "That's right," Eric answered. And you programmed these security bots?" "Not to kill anybody. Drake reprogrammed them to kill." He closed his eyes and kept them shut for a while, then opened them. "You can charge me. My brother is dead and it's my fault. I don't care what happens to me." "You will not be charged at this time," Watanabe answered carefully. A nurse came in. "Visits up." She checked Eric's monitors and said to Watanabe, "Can you guys take a hint, or do I need to call a doctor?" "I'm not a guy, ma'am," Dorothy Gut said, politely standing up. Watanabe stood up and said to Eric, Dorothy would really like a functioning nanogen bot to analyze." Eric shrugged. "They're all over the nanogen's core area." "Not anymore. The place burned to crap. All that plastic. It took 2 days to put the fire out. There was nothing left. No bots. We found what we think is Drake. Dental records will tell. And that shrink machine. It's a charcoal briquette." "Are you going to charge anybody?" Eric asked, just as Watanabe and Gut were leaving. Watanabe stopped in the doorway. "The perpetrators are dead. The DA's getting pressured not to do any prosecutions. The pressure's coming from, let's say, from government entities who don't want these robots talked about. My guess is this thing gets played as an industrial accident." His voice took on a note of disappointment. "But you never know," he added, and glanced at the forensic scientist. "It's the kind of conundrum," Dorothy said, "and I like to noodle with, don't we?" "I enjoy conundrums," Dorothy Gut said, rather primly. "Come along, Dan. The gentleman needs his rest." Chapter 52. Molokai, 18 November, 9 o'clock a.m. The rain over West Molokai had passed, and the trade wind had grown stronger, raking the palm trees along the beach and tearing spray from the surf. Set back from the water, a cluster of tents made of canvas and bamboo thumped and fluttered in the wind. The Dixie Maru Eco Tent Resort had seen better days, affordable on a student's stipend. Kenriking sat up on the cot and stretched. The wind lifted a muslin curtain in the window of the tent, revealing a view of the beach, the palms, an expanse of blue water. Close to the beach, a white explosion burst from the sea. Karen grabbed Rick Hutter by the shoulder and shook him. "A whale, Rick!" Rick rolled over and opened his eyes. "Where?" he said drowsily. "You're not interested." "Yes, I am. Just sleepy." He sat up and looked out the window. Karen admired the muscles across Rick's back and shoulders. In the lab in Cambridge, it had never occurred to her that Rick might have a decent body under those ratty flannel shirts he likes to wear. "I don't see anything," he said. "Watch. Maybe it'll happen again." They observed the sea in silence. In the distance, across the Molokai Channel, the misty outline of the Kuaupali of Oahu lay along the horizon, the mountain peaks caped with cotton puffs of clouds. It was raining on the Pali. Rick put his hand around Karen's waist. She placed her hand over his and squeezed it. Without warning, it happened again. First the head and then most of the body of a humpback whale appeared, breaching and turning in the air, followed by an incredible bomb-like splash. They watched the sea for a while longer, but it was quiet. Maybe the whale had sounded or moved off. Rick broke the silence. "I got a call from that cop, Lieutenant Watanabe." "What? You didn't tell me." He says we're free to leave Hawaii. Karen snorted. They're hushing it up? Yeah. And we get to go back to boring old Cambridge. Speak for yourself, Karen said, turning to him. I'm not going back to Cambridge. Not now. Why? Because I'm going to find a way back. There. The microworld, you mean? She just smiled. But Karen, that's impossible. There's no way. And even if there were, you'd be crazy to try it. He looked at his arms. The bruises still hadn't faded completely. The microworld kills humans like flies. Sure, every new world is dangerous. But think of all those discoveries, she sighed. Rick, I'm a scientist. I have to go there. In fact, I can't imagine not going into the microworld again. The technology exists. And you know as well as I do that with technology, once a thing is invented, it never gets uninvented. The bad things too, Rick agreed. Exactly. Kilobots and microdrones are here to stay. People will die in terrible new ways. Terrible wars will be fought with this technology. The world will never be the same. A gust of wind shook the tent, and the canvas flapped against their duffels in the corner. What about us? Rick asked. After the wind had died down. Us? Yeah, you and me, I mean. He tried to pull her back onto the bed. But Karen was lost in thought. In her mind's eye, she saw the view from their camping spot on the cliffs of Tantalus. A mist-filled valley, cloaked in green, clear waterfalls trailing, a lost valley not yet explored, or even truly seen by human eyes. There has to be, she began. Something had caught her attention, a glint of metal flying out of one of the duffels. A chill ran through her, the memory of bots whirling through the air like insects. Whatever it was, it flew out the window, so small it passed right through the holes of the screen. It was nothing, she thought. She turned to Rick. There has to be a way back. The end. Hopefully you enjoyed Micro, a novel by Michael Crichton and Richard Preston. This has been our Partyful with Micro. Hopefully you enjoyed. See ya. See ya next time.